So our strategy and our mission is very, very strong and very, very clear. We have no confusion within MarkLogic as to what we believe is the best use case for our technology, and that's as a place to integrate data. It's a way and a strategy and a new technique to solve a problem. And very interestingly, from our lens, and we're just a little biased, we don't believe you can do the kinds of integrations of your data with any other database in the market, whether it's a next generation product or whether it's a prior generation or the generation before. So we believe that it's a very differentiated approach to actually integrate data, bring context into data, and allow data to be that key business enabler that you're all after. Data, at the end of the day, is one of the most critical business assets, but it's also an asset that's grossly underutilized in many, many organizations. And a lot of what we'll be talking about is how do you use a database to integrate data, but you're not integrating it just for fun and for entertainment. I know that's Ken's job, fun and entertainment. You're actually integrating the data because you want to do something with it. And what you want to do with it is you want to transform your business. If you think about the Jeffrey Moore discussion, Crossing the Chasm and all the different theories he has about innovation and how you engage and how you make changes, that's what you're being asked to do with the data in your business, is take this asset that's generally locked up, it's bits and bytes, zeros and ones, somewhere on disk, and make it into something that the business can consume and the business can use. And that's what the MarkLogic strategy is all about. So before we jump in too far, though, I want to thank all of you. This is a list of a subset of our customers. These are all customers that are building mission-critical applications. Joe will do a panel shortly. We'll have players from Chevron, from Credit Suisse. There's presentations from folks like Cisco and Erie and Eaton. So we have lots of different customers that are going to be presenting throughout the conference. And we do want to make this a two-way exchange. We're going to tell you a lot about our technology, and you have an opportunity to hear from a number of these customers as to how they're uniquely solving their data challenges and how they're applying this technology and how they've been innovative, almost essentially all of them around integrating data and making data usable for their business. So my thanks to all of you that are presenting. We spend a lot of time preparing for these presentations. Having seen some of the drafts that have been submitted for some of the customer presentations, I know that all of you have spent a tremendous amount of time to help us by sharing your success stories with the other attendees of the conference. So my thanks to the presenters as well. Where I'm going to transition now kind of away from kind of intro and start and go actually into, let's start talking about the data integration challenge. And integrate to innovate. Innovation is about successfully driving a digital transformation in your business. Don't get too lost on digital transformation. Why do we have to have a term for it or kind of a tagline for it? What it's really about is giving your business some agility and allowing them to use the data to differentiate themselves and become a better business. And I don't think in today's world it's an optional exercise by any of you. How many of you in the room, and if every hand doesn't go up, I just know somebody's not telling the truth. How many of you use Amazon.com to buy goods and services? Pretty much everybody. And how many of you use it frequently? Pretty much everybody. Okay, another quick question. How many of you are old enough to remember Sears Roebuck and Company? Okay, so we've got honesty rolling. That's a good thing. So if you look at Sears and you think about Sears Roebuck, what happened with Sears Roebuck? We all grew up with the Sears catalog. I remember it coming in the mail and you're thumbing through it. They had all the data, right? They had all the goods. You could buy almost anything from Sears Roebuck. And by the way, you could have it pretty much delivered locally. You could have it brought in to one of their appliance stores, one of their service centers, one of their stores, and you could go get it. So for modern distribution at the time, you could do all that. But they don't exist today. And the reason they don't exist today is because they didn't take care of that digital transformation. They didn't change their business model. They didn't use all that data that they had. It was all locked up in a catalog. And in reality, Amazon.com is no different than Sears Roebuck was 30 years ago. It's just that it's an online experience, it's electronic, and the goods come to your home instead of you going to pick them up somewhere. although very often you still go to pick them up. You go to a digital locker, you go to a distribution center for FedEx at Kinko's or something like that. So in a way, it's really no different. It's just that they didn't innovate. They didn't use their data to their advantage. And so why didn't they? Well, the reason they didn't is they stuck with their legacy approach. They had a huge amount of technical debt associated with the way they were running their business. It was this thing, it was an anchor. It was the catalog was anchoring them and preventing them from moving on. And so ultimately their survival came into play. And so when we think about digital transformations now, and we think about you don't really want to be the one sticking with your old way of doing things and doing things the same way you've done them for 30 years, because if you do, you probably just keep getting the same results. And the same results for your business probably doesn't give them the transformation effect that they're really looking for so that they can think differently and they can kind of grow their business and make it more successful. So we're going to talk a little bit about leaving this technical debt behind. But in order to do that, I'm going to walk you through a handful of approaches that people have been using to integrate data. And I'll talk to you about the trends in them. Those of you that have attended before know I'm pretty upfront about my points of view on different technology approaches to solve problems. And I'm going to walk through some of the ways many of you have tried to solve these problems. And by the way, I'm one of the ones that have tried to solve the problems the same way. These are approaches I've used, not some of the more modern ones, but going back years ago, especially with relational databases. So the first one is the whole ETL approach. And the ETL approach is pretty interesting. This was the relational way of integrating data, is I have all the data coming in, I ETL it, so I transform it. I extract it, I transform it, I load it. And I do all this upfront processing with ETL. And you say, okay, well, that worked. That gave me my data warehouse. My data warehouse was great. The problem came in, though, is that as I used ETL, all of a sudden, different data warehouses needed the same data, different applications needed the same data, and then businesses had special use cases. So we spawned from this complicated web of ETL, we spawned data marts. I'll now go give you your little mini version of my data warehouse so you can do your specific business function. And what ended up happening is this became kind of a very tangled web of interconnections of data. And every time something on the business side changes, what do you have to do? You have to go untangle that web and retangle it a different way in order to get the result. So what were we talking about on the last slide? Agility. There's nothing wrong with ETL. You can solve the problem with ETL if you have enough time and you have enough money. But in most businesses today, we don't have endless amounts of time. And from our process of selling software to you, I know you don't have endless amounts of money. You make that very clear to us over and over, but we won't go down there. Let's just say you don't want to get into this scenario where you're tangling and untangling data. And then there's been kind of a new wave of data warehouses have come out. And this new wave of data warehouses, oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to go to a cloud data warehouse. Well, a cloud data warehouse that uses ETL in order to manage your data has the same tangled web. You're just running it somewhere else. You haven't really solved the problem. And so be careful when you're looking at technologies and products about kind of these cloud things. And you just don't want to be in this tangled web of every time the business changes, I have to change my data. Every time the data changes, I have to rewrite my business logic. That's an endless loop that causes projects to go on for years and years. And I know many of you live on the East Coast and the Midwest and all. I thought this analogy works really well for ETL. It's you're kind of shoveling snow over and over and over again. And what happens? It just keeps falling and falling and falling. Well, this is the same thing that essentially you do when you use ETL. You're shoveling it, you're moving it, you're retransforming it, you're re-indexing it, you're retransforming it, you're re-indexing it over and over and over. So my only advice on this one is don't fall for snowflakes. They put me up to it, I have to tell you. It wasn't my idea. All right. This next one will be my idea, though, so I'll take credit for this next one. So the next way people have tried to solve this, and Joe and David kind of did a really nice job on the video of walking through kind of what happens in the Hadoop data lake. This Hadoop data lake got a lot of attention as it launched, as a way, oh, look how fast I can integrate my data. And the reality is it was really good for very rapidly integrating my data, but the reason it was so rapid and easy to integrate data is because it threw away all the context, it threw away all the metadata, it didn't worry about governance, it didn't worry about security. So all of a sudden what ends up happening is I put all that data in, I've got my data lake, it's a beautiful thing, I've got all my data together, the dream has been realized, and then the users go to use it. And they can't find anything in it because there's no context, there's no meaning. The data is just a bunch of data. It got thrown together. In many operations, they had to shut it down because they didn't know what was in there. So they couldn't secure it, they couldn't safely share it, because how do you share something safely and allocate who gets to see what parts of it if there is no security model and you don't know what's in it? It all comes back to you don't really know what's in there. So what happened is, and a number of you in the room have had to make this conversion to say, hey, I thought that was the way to solve the problem. The reality is it's a file system. It's a really good file system. It's not a database, and it misses the data management part of database management systems, DBMS. It doesn't have the management component. So what ends up happening is you have all this data together that you now can't use. And it's not regulated. If you're in a regulated industry, let's say you ask a question in a regulated industry. The good news is you might find the answer in there. The bad news is you probably can't tell the regulator how you got that answer, where that data came from, who touched that data, who modified that data. So what ended up happening is these data lakes, per se, became very stagnant. They weren't usable by the business. So what did they end up doing? They just spawned a new name. And we've heard about data lakes, data landfill, data swamps. I actually think about it as a data cesspool. And this is a graphical image that will stick with you for a long time. But what I can tell you about this graphical image is you certainly don't want to drink it. You probably don't want to swim in it. And I can almost guarantee you, you don't want to put your data in there. So be very, very careful around this data lake concept. It's not going to solve your problem, but you could end up with a pretty ugly cesspool in your backyard. And that's the worst image you're going to see today. The next approach, and this has been one that's gotten a lot of attention recently, is this enterprise application integration. There's lots of application integration strategies, but these connector architectures. And these connector architectures essentially say, hey, I have a connector to this SAP thing, and I have a connector to this NetSuite thing, and I have a connector to the Salesforce thing, and so now I can share data between them. And I can link in, I can go in and hook over there, bring the data over here, do something with it there, bring it back over. And again, we're heading back into this tangled web of these connectors because every time one of your endpoints change, what do you have to do? You have to rewire all your connectors. If I go to a new version of an endpoint, got to rewire my connector and move it across. But so nothing wrong with connectors. They're great, and you're going to hear from Joe later about our strategy to utilize connectors on the left side, which is a nice, convenient, graphical way to go get data from somewhere else. But what it's not is a point-to-point connector architecture. It leaves out the database in the middle. It leaves out the place that says, I'm going to normalize the data, I'm going to make sense of the data, I'm going to enrich the data, I'm going to add metadata content to it, I'm going to put security protocols on it. All that, again, kind of falls by the wayside. But the fundamental problem that people are having with this EA architecture of connectors is we're back to that tangled web again. That every time the business requirement changes, I might have to change the way I'm using my connector. Every time the data sources change, again, I have to rewire it again. So this one is more like, kind of a city planner doing a transportation system, is they keep growing, and every time they add an endpoint, they have to reroute all the traffic. And so it's this continual modification of a transportation system. That's the analogy here of connectors, is I'm adding connectors, I'm adding new endpoints, and so what do I have to do? I have to keep rewiring everything. And the thing that's really hurting and slowing down projects is this continual rewiring of things. So what's a better solution? A better solution is an operational data hub. So what is an operational data hub? This is a term we put on it. We call it operational data hub because you're bringing it together, and you're not bringing it together just because it's fun to integrate data. You're bringing it together so you can do the three things on the right side of this chart, which is access it. You want to build transactional applications against it. You very often want to do analytics and business intelligence against it. And then very often there is something downstream that needs to feed the data to. In fact, some of our customers are now using Hadoop downstream for their analytical sandbox. So it's not all bad. It's a really good analytical sandbox in Hadoop. But if I feed the system down there, what's happened to that data before I feed it, potentially down to a Hadoop cluster, is I've curated the data. I've actually added knowledge to the data. I've harmonized it. I've enriched it in many cases. I might have added semantics to it. I might merge it with some reference data. I bring in the metadata, so all the knowledge about the data. If the data came from relational, the metadata, part of that's just the schema. I know where things are. I know what the data means from the schema. So I bring all that knowledge together, and I've curated it, and I put governance around it and security around it, and now I can push that data off to wherever I need to, but I know where all that data came from, and I know that it's trusted data, and it meets the regulatory requirements of my business. And so this operational data hub, this has become the most common pattern that our customers are using MarkLogic for. This is how the kinds of implementations that we've been doing over and over and over again are operational data hubs. Where this technology came from is actually out of our field consulting organization. So they started building these hubs. This is what people were using MarkLogic for, is to bring this data together. What we've done is we've transitioned that technology and we've brought it into the engineering group so that we can kind of take this approach, make it part of the product, enhance and build it and support it for you. And when we say support it for you, we're actually supporting a much more detailed version of it, and it's part of the product. It was released last Friday with 9.05 of MarkLogic. So 9.0.5 release of MarkLogic. This is not one of these announcements where you're going to have to wait till version 10 for it. This is something we've brought in. This framework exists. Our engineering group is now supporting it. Our engineering group is now enhancing it and building on it. And very, very simply, the way it works is you start on the left, and we have this concept of you essentially ingest your data as is. You bring your data in. You don't transform your data coming in. And the reason you don't transform your data coming in is because it's going to go through a curation process where the output of it's going to be this curated data. The data is going to be massaged, managed. You're going to know where it came from. It's going to have security. It's going to have policy applied to it. All the things that enterprises need to do. It's not throw the data together and hope for the best, because you'll get a cesspool. It's bring it together, keep all the context, index it, make it usable. And then once it's curated, now I can start doing my business APIs. I can put my APIs on front of it. I can use open interfaces to access it. And you're going to hear at the conference a lot about that column called curation and what happens in there. What is metadata all about? What is smart mastering all about? Smart mastering is something that's coming. We're going to talk about that in a second. You're going to hear about all the details of kind of how this framework works. But ultimately, this is the way you build enterprise-class, mission-critical, operational, transactional, and analytical applications against data coming from lots of silos. And the beauty of it is I don't rewire it every time the data changes, because the data goes through an automatic curation process. It gets indexed on ingestion. It's immediately usable. I don't rewrite my queries. I don't reindex my database every time my business need changes. I have a very agile repository. Why do you need agility? It goes back to the example of the Sears Roebuck versus Amazon. You want to take advantage of your digital assets. Why do you want to take advantage of them? So you can do digital transformations. Why do you want to do that? So you survive. So your business doesn't get stagnant and not make the progress you need it to make. MarkLogic, this is not a replacement for the database. This is part of how you use the database. MarkLogic is by far the best database for a data hub. As all of you know, we focused on the enterprise end of the market. We always believed all those trusted features are really critically important. Security, HA, DR, backup recovery, everything about what you need to run in an enterprise is really important. We set our bar based on what some of the largest intelligence agencies in the world need from a security perspective and from a reliability perspective. We're running systems that can't go down. I can tell you that systems are still going down in name brand places. I'll leave the name of the bank out of it, but yesterday I was over getting my Pete's coffee, and there's a sign on a bank branch down in Embarcadero 2 or Embarcadero 3 that says, we're sorry, we're unavailable today. And the doors are locked. And there's a lady banging on the door saying, well, what if I go to Oakland? And the person yelling through the glass was, they're down too. So this is a major bank, and they're saying, but there's an ATM machine over there. And they had the doors locked with all the employees inside. Yeah, and this is a respectable business and everything. They are a MarkLogic customer, thankfully not in that part of their business. They must have used open source or something, I'm convinced of it. I was going to go up and write on the sign, you know, thank you very much, open source software. But I decided not to. But the point is systems can't go down. You really don't want these systems to go down at all. And then you want the data to be easy to load, easy to get access to the data. You want it to be very fast. You want it to be very scalable. We take care of all that stuff. That's what a database does. A database brings data in, it manages the data so you can access the data, and it does it all in a trustworthy process. And that's what MarkLogic does with our database. It also happens that moving to the cloud, we are the best database for the cloud as well. On security, last year at MarkLogic World, we announced our advanced security capabilities. Critically important. Advanced security, nothing is more important than securing your data. When we think about security, we do not think about putting the data in a vault and hiding it away so nobody can access it. The reality is you want to share the data, but you want to safely share the data. So our very granular security, it exists essentially, so I can put it up in the cloud. I can put it wherever I want to put it, on-premise, in the cloud, in a hybrid environment, but I can actually secure the data. I can actually bring all that data together. I can have multiple different people and multiple different applications accessing it, and people only get to see the part that they're intended to see. And so advanced security, really important. We actually have a government client, one of our intelligence agency clients, been with us for a long time. In order for them to run even in the Amazon Secure Government Cloud, what's called C2S, they had to add advanced security to their deployment. I'd love to tell you they're going to be here talking all about what they do, but they're not going to be here talking about what they do. They don't talk about what they do. I know about this much of what they do, but I do know that advanced security is what's enabling them to move one of the most sensitive databases in the world into a public cloud environment. Granted, a little bit of a controlled environment. It is for the government. It is supposedly secure, but the only way it's secure is if underneath the covers, you've added the advanced security capability to it. We're also very firm believers in cloud neutrality, the idea that says, hey, I build my application once, and I run my application wherever I want. In other words, I don't build an application and say, okay, I'm now locked into somebody's proprietary cloud because they only offer their database on that particular cloud. That is a recipe for disaster. In fact, a couple of the customers that will be on the panel, we are talking about the whole idea of what happened when we outsourced data centers. And then ultimately, the integrators, they had to add margin to it. And here we are 10 and 15 years later, and people are still trying to bring their data centers back in-house to get out from that. They got locked in. And if you build on one of these cloud-only databases, you're going to have lock-in. You're not going to have the possibility for hybrid. Some of them don't exist on-premise. So we're very firm believers in hybrid cloud, and we're extremely firm believers in cloud neutrality. Build my application once, run it wherever you want. And if you do that, you also get an advantage of being able to taking advantage of what I call cloud economics. Cloud economics has a great principle of it, the notion being I only pay for what I use. I sometimes refer to it as consumption economics. It's another term that's evolved in the industry a little bit. The idea that says if I'm not consuming it, I'm not paying for it. Joe is going to share with you in the later presentation, you'll hear more about it at MarkLogic World, the MarkLogic Query Service, which is going to be a really interesting capability in the cloud to have very variable workloads and ultimately only pay for what you use. It's a really interesting thing that we could do with MarkLogic, having to do with our unique architecture, the way our product was designed by Christopher Lindblad, our founder, years and years ago, is that we can take care of variable capacity very effectively. So you're going to hear about how you can run in the cloud, deal with variable capacity, do it very efficiently and very automatically. So we're going to drive this notion that says cloud economics are a reality, because if you don't use the cloud properly, our experience has been it can cost you orders of magnitude more money. In fact, we've had customers do full-scale tests there. They looked at the price tag and they said, oh, I really like my data center much better right now. My data center wasn't very pretty before, but it's beautiful right now when I compare it to the cost of running on the cloud. If you use the cloud properly, you get great cloud economics. And it's something we're committed to do, is make sure that the cloud economics work for you and your business. So what do I do with this operational data hub, and what happens with it? Ultimately, when we design our products and we release technology to you, we are focused on building mission-critical applications. That is what MarkLogic is all about, is mission-critical applications. So how do people traditionally build applications? And you're going to hear a lot about this concept throughout MarkLogic World. There's going to be some great presentations on it. This is the traditional approach of the way we've built applications around data for a long period of time. You start with loading the data. Once you have the data loaded, you curate the data, you normalize the data, you ETL the data, you do something with the data. You then design an API, and then you go to the business and you say, look at this data I have. What would you like to be able to do with this data? And if you think about it for a second, why did we do it this way for all these years? We did it this way because you couldn't start really with the business side and go backwards because you didn't know if you could really integrate the data. So until you integrated it, until you figured out that you could ETL it, until you figured out you could deliver it, you're kind of stuck in, hey, a data-centric view of the world. I have a customer that I'm working with, one of the accounts that I sponsor in life sciences. They're not here. They're working on a project that has to get delivered. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it. Fortunately, they're doing a really interesting project. But they kind of started with this. They came running into the CIO's office and said, I got that MarkLogic instance in. I put the data into MarkLogic, and look at all the cool findings. And I found all this interesting stuff. So then what did I do? I added more data to it. And in life sciences, you can only imagine clinical trials, those kind of things, all the endless numbers of questions you could dream up of data. If you're matching drugs and results and genetics and everything else and DNA, you put all that together, that's really cool stuff. And they're really excited. For the first time in a matter of weeks, they're making all these discoveries about all these interesting trends. And they run to the CIO, let me show it to you. What does the CIO do? Say, yeah, that's really interesting, but it's not what I committed to the business. That's not the deliverable that I was looking for. So what we're suggesting is do an API-first approach when you build your applications. And what we mean by an API-first approach is go identify the business need. In the example I just gave you, the CIO has a very clear picture that was pitched to the business side who's funding the project that says, I am going to give you this capability to do the following things with our data. And it's going to be good, and it's going to be reliable, and it's going to be fast, and it's going to be secure, and it's going to solve world hunger. And that's all goodness. But what they did wrong before is they started with the data. What we're saying is, no, start with identify the business issue, and then work backwards. Do an iterative process around the flow to say, do I really understand what the business needs, so that when I get to the end of the job, I don't have an application that is mismatched from what the business requires. So we want you to kind of think about this shift of API first, where all of a sudden you kind of got to rewire your brain. And by the way, the most common way people use our product, they put all the data in, they expose APIs, and they build applications against APIs. Under the idea that says, I can make changes all night long to the underlying data as long as I keep the sanctity of my APIs. So get your APIs correctly defined up front, understand clearly what the business wants to do, because remember, in a MarkLogic world, we don't ETL all the data. Relational world, you had to go the other way. You had to ETL the data to make the data useful. We don't do that. We harmonize the data and we curate the data, but I only curate and harmonize the parts of the data that are relevant for the business need I have. I can do more curation later if I need to, if the business requirements change. I can improve on it. I can add more data to it. But the whole notion is, hey, have this shift. And this is a mind shift. Don't take this too lightly. API first is an absolute mind shift. We have worked for a long time from left to right, and I'm telling you, you now need to go right to left. It's a different way of approaching it, but we're finding that it's a much more effective way of engaging with our clients is to define and make sure we have clarity as to the business requirements. When you're in IT and you're owning data projects, having clarity from within the organization about what the business wants, critically important. I never like those phone calls I get where it's like, hey, we built this really cool thing, but it doesn't solve my problem. It's like, well, what was your problem? Well, I don't really know. Yeah, it becomes very difficult to diagnose those. Let's avoid that problem. Let's make this mind shift. So once we do that, we make a mind shift. What do? We solve mission critical problems. These are some of the most common use cases we're seeing. ERP integration. We've had customers integrate up to 140 to 170 ERP systems. And you're thinking out there, why would you have 170 ERP systems? You didn't do it by design. You didn't sit down one day and say, I'd like to have 140 HR systems. Wouldn't that be cool? What happened is M&A came along, and there's been a massive amount of consolidation. A number of the customers here, you've gone through consolidation in your own industries, and all of a sudden I have 4, 5, 6, 10, 20, 50 ERP systems, but I need an integrated view of the data. So this has become a very common application is integrate all that data, make sense of it, and then do the downstream business processes off the integrated view. It's a better alternative than embarking on a 10-year ERP consolidation and upgrade. And why is it better than the 10-year ERP upgrade? A, it's less costly. B, it's more immediate results. But more importantly, it's agile. Your ERP integration, by the time you get there in 10 years, you will have bought 50 more companies, and you'll be back in the same problem again. We don't like this idea of this tangled web of I untangle it, and then I retangle it, and I start all over again. This is the roller coaster we've been on in our industry for a long time. So we're trying to get you off that. ERP integration is a good way to do it. Mainframe migration. Finally, after all these years, it's not dead. We're not telling you rip it out, but we are suggesting to you that you can grab data off a mainframe very effectively. You can ingest that into MarkLogic, and you can do new modern things and transformations with that data in the MarkLogic environment while you're keeping your mainframe in sync. Why is this one become important? I think one of my customers in one of the military agencies, he said it best. I've been talking to him for 4 years about how to do mainframe migration, and being an old mainframe guy, we bonded. We understand COBOL workbooks. We know how these work. And so we have a great relationship. And he finally kind of raised his hand just recently, said, I'm ready to go, we're going, we're going to do this. And the project, we've done all kinds of proof of concept work, we've shown demos, everybody's all excited about it. And I said, what motivated you to move? He said, well, there's this lady, and she's 56 years old, which I still think is pretty young. She's 56 years old, and she's retiring. And she is the only one that knows that code. And I know I can hire her back as a consultant for a little while, but she actually does want to retire. And I don't know what I'm going to do. And so ultimately, migrate the data. Start doing new things with the data. It's a valuable asset. It's locked up. Unlock the data. Regulated data and integration. A number of you have done this. We've become extremely well known in financial services, insurance industry, of dealing with curated data that has history, has governance, has bitemporality. The idea that says, I know where the data came from, I know who changed it, I know when it changed, and I know that the result I'm getting is the correct result, so I won't get wrapped around the axle with my regulators. Very common. Smart metadata management, another very important and very common use case for MarkLogic. The metadata management is, I don't want to restore all my data, but I'd sure love to have a big catalog of where everything is in my operation. So we've done a lot of these metadata catalogs. Of course, curated data and analytics. If you're going to do analytics against data, the results of your data with analytics, it's only as good as the data itself. AI, by the way, has kind of some of the similar problems, which is the AI brain can only be good if the data is good. It's not going to make sense out of bad data. It needs good inputs. Your brain needs good inputs to make good decisions. You have bad inputs, you make bad decisions. So AI works the same way. So curated data and analytics encompasses the AI world as well. It says, hey, I can feed my AI engine with curated data. Imagine if I give a good AI engine curated data. It's really powerful. And then something that we've always been religious about at MarkLogic is integrated search, integrated discovery, all built into the product. So all the data that you bring in, you can always search the data. One of the reasons why we're a virtual standard in the publishing industry and the media industry is what a great way to serve up content. So those are the applications that you've been building. And then the net result of it is we end up in a great place on Gartner Reports. This is Operational Database Management System. So this is the ODBMS report. This is from November of 2017, so the most frequent one that they had. And you'll see that MarkLogic, mostly because of your contribution and your willingness, in many cases, to talk to them about what we're doing and how you're using our technology. They rely heavily on customer references. We end up being the only challenger, highest up in the challenger box on ability to execute, on vision. So we're in a great place on both of them. And we're truly challenging the incumbent databases. We're also the only provider up there that has a cloud-neutral strategy, because some of the other next-generation products are locked up in a cloud-only environment, which for many of you doesn't meet the requirement. So we're real happy with the position there. And then we're equally happy with our position in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Data Management Solution for Analytics. We came out really well there, again, because of your customer references. And so we're the leader in the visionary category on this one. And I'm kind of okay with the idea that says, if I'm thinking about data management solutions for analytics, I'm sharing the visionary box with Google. I'm okay with that. I'll take that all day long. And by the way, if I can read the one note I have down here, there is something we take great pride in on this particular Gartner report. They have a statement in the report that says, and I have this in quotes to make sure I deliver it properly, MarkLogic received the highest score for overall experience of doing business with a vendor. Thank you for that. So let's spend a few minutes talking about what's next and what's not next. Autonomous database. This is not what's next for MarkLogic. What autonomous database is, and there's a reason it's in red, it might remind you of a certain company, starts with an O, ends with an E. They've been in the database market for a long time. Oracle, for those of you that can't figure it out. They came out with this autonomous database announcement, and everybody's, oh, this is awesome. It's going to make the database so much better to administer a database. This was done by Oracle for purely selfish reasons. What are they doing? They're trying to convince all of you that have Oracle implementations to move those implementations into the cloud, and Oracle is going to run it for you. So for the last 30 years, they didn't care about how complex it was to manage it, but now that they have to run it, and it's going to affect their margins of their cloud business, now we're going to make it autonomous, and we're going to make management less complex. We don't think making management less complex is what you're really after when you think about autonomous database and next generation. It shouldn't be about management. We took care of the management problem in version 1 of our product. In our architecture, we don't have the concept, bless you, by the way, we don't have the concept of the DBA that sits there and all day long is re-indexing the database and reorganizing the database. We have our load as is, our ask anything universal index. We've already reduced all that labor cost. So what we're working on is not an autonomous database focused on lower cost of administration and management, but rather we're focused on the age of the smart database, which is about making your data more valuable. It's not about better administration, it's about better data. It's about more useful data. It's about doing new things with your data. That's what we're focused on. So you'll hear throughout the conference comments about the smart database. I'm going to cover it at a really high level. Number 1, it understands your data. Number 2, it reduces human error. So how does it understand your data and how does it reduce human error? We automate a lot of the curation functions. So in a smart database, we start applying things like machine learning and AI internally in the product to say, I can do better mastering. You're going to hear from Joe and throughout the conference about smart mastering, this idea that says, I'm automatically curating the data. What is data curation? I'm making the data better. I'm enriching the data, I'm making decisions about what the data means, and I'm applying those in the art of harmonizing the data such that I can do lots of flexible, interesting things with the data. And what's the beauty if I'm doing it that way? I'm not driving administration costs down, I'm driving the value of your data up. And oh, by the way, it gets smarter over time. I keep learning as I'm learning about your data and I'm curating your data and I'm running these automated processes, I'm getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Therefore, your business gets smarter and smarter and smarter. And when you hear from Jeffrey Moore about transformations of business, you become the enabler. But you do it smartly, and you do it with your data, and you do it with really smart data. So what happens in this scenario is you're all facing this. The number of data sources you have to manage is going up and up. If we go back to the traditional way we've been solving this problem with ETL, what happens as the number of data sources go up? Complexity grows. It becomes more and more complex. It starts slowing you down. You're less and less efficient. If you're using a connector architecture, what happens every time you add a new data source? I have to go get a new connector. I have to link that connector in. I then have to take that data and put it somewhere else for some other unique purpose. So what really happens in traditional enterprises, the way databases have evolved, is the value actually goes down as I add more and more data sources. A smart database works differently. As you add more data and you add more data sources, you simply get more value. The database gets smarter. I can complement the data with semantic relationships. So if I load triples and I add triple store to it and I add all these relationships of data, I get to automatically use those relationships in our semantics capability to enrich the data and get more knowledge out of the data. So I have a very different scenario where the value is going up with the data sources. And this is, again, something I want you to pay a lot of attention to over the next couple of days, is where are we going with this smart database concept? Because we started this trajectory 3 or 4 years ago when we added the semantics capability, but now we're just taking it to the next level. And this conference is really about taking our technology, sharing with you, and taking it to the next level. It's all about innovation here. You're going to hear about the operational data hub capability. You're going to hear about smart mastering. For cloud processing, I mentioned this thing about capacity and variable capacity. You're going to hear about the MarkLogic query service and what the query service does to scale up and scale down very, very efficiently, so you can take advantage of cloud economics and not have cloud economics sink your IT budgets and cause you great grief. You're going to hear from Jeffrey Moore. I encourage you, up next is going to be the panel with Joe Pasqua with some of our customers. It's going to be really interesting. You'll hear from different people and how they're thinking about things. Tomorrow, we've got David Gorbett. David Gorbett is going to take the operational data hub, and just like David Gorbett always does, he's going to dissect that. And he's going to explain how all these different things work in isolation of each other, and he's going to talk to you about how all these things tie together, and ultimately, at the end of the day, allow you to ingest your data as is, curate your data, and give phenomenal access to it. And then, just a reminder, Ken mentioned it during his comedy hour. At the very end of the conference, we have Christopher Lindblad. He's going to get interviewed by Joe. Topics like blockchain and AI and machine learning, and how do you make a smart database truly smart? These data hubs is the starter piece of it. It's the foundational thing you do, but what happens under the covers of a data hub is where all the intelligence comes into play. And they're going to talk about kind of what's out in the future for MarkLogic. Look beyond this release, look beyond MarkLogic 10. What I can tell you is most everything we're talking about at the conference is stuff that's coming out here in various iterations of version 9, or in the case of the Operational Data Hub, already released with 9.0.5. One last thought about the conference today. This is about innovating together. And so the goal that we've put out there for all the MarkLogic employees that are here helping with it is transfer knowledge to you, innovate with you, hear about what you're trying to do, help you try to figure out better ways to do these things. And then it's also about you innovating together. There's nothing better than customer A talking to customer B and them beating up customer C who's doing the wrong thing. No, I didn't mean that. What I really meant is there's nothing better than customer A sharing with customer B how they solved world hunger, and customer C going, wow, that's awesome, that's what I need to do. And so this conference is really about you taking advantage of technology, solving really difficult data problems, supporting your digital transformations, and integrating your data so you can be